Just so we know.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, and just so you know, then the microphone, they'll be using this microphone over there. So I'm going to take the handheld microphone and give it to them so that way they can pass it around while they're answering questions.
That's fine. Yeah, yeah. But that'll be after all of this stuff.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So the panel will be the last thing.
Exactly. And I'll be introducing Cristobal, who's the moderator. Did you connect?
Yes.
All right, bienvenidos todos y todas. Se pueden sentar para comenzar. Ok, muchísimas gracias. De nuevo, buenos días. Soy Patricia Redondo, past chair of the board of directors, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our second day of the conference, our wonderful conference con Cultivando. You don't need to see me. Cultivando Justicia con Amor, which is such a beautiful title, and I continue to be in awe of what this conference planning committee, who's here, Nancy and Hernan, who have been able to pull together such a spectacular conference. Our first virtual, her first in-person conference, and these are not small feats. To our staff from AMC Source también que nos están ayudando aquí. Wow, everything makes it happen. And as we begin today's session, this morning's session, again, I want to think about our familias in Ukraine que lo están pasando muy mal. I would be remiss to not call that to our attention and know that our prayers are there, our money, I hope, is there también in some humanitarian form. Bueno, ahora, hablando de el Congreso, so this morning we have several special guests. We have a wonderful panel and a little bit of a recap of AAHHE in the last 2.5, 3 years. However, I also want to call out our awards, our sponsors who have been so generous with us. Yesterday, Victor went through all the slides, so you know who our premier donors are. We have all of the signs posted outside también, so you can recognize their names. And once again, to give special thanks to Dr. Edith Fernandez, who is here hosting us from Nevada State College. We are just really privileged to be in such beautiful space, in such a beautiful part of the country. So we thank all of our sponsors who have been generous with their space, with their laptops, with their money, y todo eso. So can you scroll back one, por favor? Yesterday, when we had our awards ceremony, Patrick Valdez, Dr. Patrick Valdez, who's was chair of the awards committee and also chair-elect of the board, said that we were going to have a couple of special awards today. And what I'd like to tell you is that this was a very deliberate process to name 2 of our awards for Latinas who have contributed so much to Latinx higher education, but to AAHHE. We have named our Founders Award and our University Faculty Award for 2 outstanding Latinas in higher education who've had long-term commitment to Latinx issues, scholarship, and leadership, of course, in their roles. So we'd like to begin by sharing that our Founders Award is named for Dr. Mildred Garcia, who's currently CEO of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. And our University Faculty Award is named for Dr. Silvia Hurtado, long-term professor committed to Latinx higher education. We're fortunate to have both of them beaming in. They'll be at the conference next year, but we're going to begin by inviting Dr. Garcia to join us on the screen. She's on the screen, but she's also
hear a thing.
Millie, Dr. Garcia, can you're on mute for some reason.
Sad.
She's not on mute. We just can't hear you. So hang on a minute. We had, oh, she can't hear us. I can't hear her. You can hear her. Can you adjust your volume, Millie? Could you? Can you hear us, Millie? Raise your hand if you can hear us, Millie. Parece que no.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Yes, I can hear.
Millie, this is Lucia Gutierrez. Can you hear me?
I'm on my cell phone. Uh-oh.
Okay, I can hear you now. So I'm going to give you a phone number to call right now, and maybe they can put you on speaker. I am the executive director. Please write down this number, 529-0259. Her name is Lily. If you call her now, then they might be able to put you on speaker. Thank you.
Shh. I can't hear her.
Millie, are you with us?
I'm with you now.
Maybe we need to turn to.
Okay. Okay, Millie?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, adelante. Felicidades.
Thank you so much for this amazing honor. A long time ago, when it was the American Association of Hispanics in Higher Ed, there was a group of us that thought that the Latinos in this country were not represented adequately on our colleges and universities. I will say to you that it was a group. And so I really dedicate this to the founders, especially my family as well, who taught me how to fight for those who have been underserved. It is quite an honor. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today. Know that my heart is with you, and this organization is very close to my heart. Adelante, amigos. We need you. It's a tough time right now, and we need all of you warriors to continue in la lucha. Muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, Millie. Gracias. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Garcia when I was at Arizona State University, and she was there. And of course, she's moved on to such fabulous roles as president of Cal State Dominguez Hills, then Cal State Fullerton, and now she is the leader, CEO, president of ASCU. So we are in great company. Millie, we look forward to seeing you next year and wherever we are. And bueno, en buena hora. Muchísimas gracias. We are now inviting our next awardee, named awardee for the University Faculty Award, Dr. Silvia Hurtado. And Dr. Hurtado, again, a longtime contributor to AAHHE and to Latinx higher education. Many of folks in the room have had her as an advisor and a member of their dissertation committee. So she is, as we can see, at the University of California, Los Angeles, as a professor in the Graduate School of Education, Higher Ed Administration. And so Dr. Hurtado, felicidades, and we invite your comments, por favor.
Thank you. I want to say that it is a great honor to be also honored alongside Dr. Millie Garcia, who has been a trailblazer. And, you know, the original organization, the American Association of Higher Education, where this used to be a caucus of, had a group of faculty that met separately, and that became AAHHE, the Association for the Study of Higher Education. And so the fact that this now became its own organization, it's really come into its own, is wonderful to see all the wonderful, wonderful changes. And also as the Latinx population has continued to grow and we've entered the professions, that AAHHE is moving along in that direction in incredibly positive ways. And our number of faculty are growing as a result of the work that we've done together to help recruit, hire, train, and all of those areas. And so I'm very pleased and honored that this award is named for me, because I hope to see many more faculty in our institutions and also in engaged in AAHHE, who I think is changing its name, or it might be changing its name soon. But anyway, so I'm very honored. So thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Dr. Hurtado. And we again look forward to seeing you at our AAHHE Conference 2023.
Yes.
So I hope you are enjoying this special opening this morning by recognizing and naming our 2 important awards for Esa Latina Trailblazers. So muchísimas gracias for being part of this festivity. In the spirit of just taking a few minutes to share with you what AAHHE has been about for the last 2-3 years, I'm going to share with you about 3 slides before we move to our panel presentation. Some of you were at the 2020 conference, others have been at other conferences that AAHHE has held. This is our 17th conference. So we want to call out some particulars that have been important to AAHHE's direction and how we have begun to make some of these changes on behalf of the association, but on behalf of all of you here. Can we flip to the new one in terms of kind of past and future directions? So what I've done is talked about evolving the association through planned change. And we're remaining mission-centric, but we have new practices that we think will fortify the association. And when I think of Dr. Esquivel's comments yesterday on being change agents and planning for change deliberately and strategically, I said, well, she's reflecting a lot of what AAHHE has been about in the last 2 years. Some of this, you can go to the next slide. Some of this started actually here at Nevada State College in June of 2019, when we had a retreat, a board retreat. And Dr. Carmen Martinez Lopez and I, with Dr. Joanne Canales, started to talk about the future direction of AAHHE, how we needed a strategic plan, how we needed to document what we were about as an association. So it actually started here, that deliberate conversation. And our rationale for change and some of our continuing commitments was for the association's relevance. We have to keep ourselves relevant as an association of higher education, the one that really leads on preparing graduate students, faculty, and administrators for higher education. We need the participation of new generations, and I'm so delighted when I look around the room yesterday and today and see many younger generations with us, and that's what the future of AAHHE is really based on, your participation and your leadership. We also received some very pointed feedback from the graduate fellows, and that feedback led us to establish a graduate fellows task force chaired by then board member Tomas Leal. Dr. Claudia Garcia Lopez was also on that. So we wanted to hear their voices, and we wanted to know what AAHHE could do to make itself better and relevant. And of course, there are the societal forces that have, since 2020, since our conference, really wreaked havoc on higher education for Latinx students, who many of whom, according to the research, have not been able to continue because of financial commitments for their families, illness in their families, and so forth. So our mission becomes even more critical. And then we have had the racial reckoning that's affected all of us in this room. It was pointed at African-American men in particular, but it's affecting all families in the United States. And of course, so we wanted to reset our strategic direction. What have we done on this side of the column? Well, we wanted to strengthen our pillar programs, which are our fellowship programs, as you know, the graduate, faculty, NLA, and of course the outstanding dissertation competition. Those are our pillar programs right now. Governance needed to be improved. We'll talk about that. We obviously require more partners in order to grow our membership. And funding. This has been an association that's been very conference-centric. And you can't rely on a conference to grow your organization. You can't rely on a conference to grow your budget and to be able to do more scholarships for students and so forth. And we wanted to professionalize ourselves further. So here's some of what we've done. I'll just talk about two things quickly: governance and operations. We had our first elected board members, a graduate student at large and a faculty member at large. And we intend to open that up a little further. We have two board members, spaces who are open, and we're going to have a call for nominations. So we're going to have an open elections process, which is actually pretty new to AAHHE. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Anybody who's interested, look for the call for nominations coming out. I've always had someone managing the books, but we now formalized it to the treasurer, Dr. Martinez Lopez, and Dr. Asara Santiago, who's treasurer-elect. We have active expanded committees. How many of you are on a committee, perchance? Anyone in the room? We've had standing committees forever, but they were pretty much just board members and maybe your friend. But we now have expanded board committees, and Patrick chaired the awards committee that had about 6 members that were not board members. So those are some of the changes. We've named 2 awards, as you can see, and we've also talked about expanding our list of awards because there are many individuals in this room who need recognition. And I think an award would be part of AAHHE's responsibility. We're going to be doing better budget forecasting and then preparing a strategic plan. And all of this is underway, the strategic plan. On the operations side, as you may have heard yesterday, we began to partner almost 2 years ago with AMC Source, which is an association management company. And that allows us as members of the board of directors to do what the work is of the board, and that isn't the operations. Okay, we can oversee the budget, we can do some strategic planning, but the day-to-day work is Dr. Lucia Gutierrez, who's our executive director, unfortunately not here with us today. We now have a CPA, we now have an attorney, and we now have a new location, which is in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. So those are some of the changes that have come out through the last 2 years. We found out how we could gain more funds through our job board. Many of you your institutions have posted on our job board. That's a huge revenue source for AAHHE, and we're delighted. And then we've had our first adaptable conference delivery here, hybrid and in person, and we expect that, having successfully done this, thank you to the support of AMC Source and Nevada State College, we can probably do this again. And we're continuing, like Victor said yesterday, you probably get a lot of notices from AAHHE, but that's our effort to really be communicative, to be able to be relevant. And so you will see more website updates and social media presence. Ahora, I think the last one. So we move ahead con ganas, con fortaleza y con compromiso. All of this requires this sort of commitment by the board of directors, but also by all of you who are our members. So muchísimas gracias for indulging me, letting you know how we're advancing the mission of AAHHE. So with this, we are now going to turn to our panel, and I'm going to invite Dr. Cristobal Rodríguez, who is going to facilitate the panel. And he's a board member. He's at Arizona State University. And I'm happy you're here. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Un aplauso, applause. Thank you so much for your leadership, and we thank you for all that you've done for us in growing our organization. So welcome, everybody. My name is Cristobal Rodríguez. I'm an Associate Dean of Equity and Inclusion and Community Engagement at the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College there at Arizona State University. Today, we're going to, oh, my screen shut off, excuse me, there we go. Today, we're going to have a focused conversation, Justicia for Latina, Latinx, Latino communities healing through activism. We're going to try to tackle one essential question. What is the potential for promoting community healing through social justice activism? With us today is Angela Valenzuela, who is a professor in the Department of Curriculum Instruction and in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. She also is the director of the Texas Center for Education Policy, and because of that has a very active presence in the Texas legislature, which is really critically important in this work of activism. She's a renowned author in multiple books. Some of you have heard about subtractive schooling, leaving children behind, how Texas-style accountability fails Latino youth, growing critically conscious teachers, a social justice curriculum for educators of Latina youth. She co-founded, and this is really important, this is where I was telling Angela earlier today, this is where there's a whole level of healing, co-founded and directs Academia Cuatli, a cultural revitalization program of instruction in Spanish for 4th and 5th graders from numerous East Austin ISD schools, currently in its 8th year of operation. The name in Nahuatl means Eagle Academy. The Saturday school offers a co-constructed English-Spanish standards-aligned curriculum embedded within indigenous epistemology, in part manifest through danza mexica, meaning Aztec dance or ceremony. The partnership consists of a legal official MOU with collaborating institutions, including the City of Austin's Emma S. Barrientos Mexican American Cultural Center, and a community-based organization, Nuestro Grupo, and the AISD, Austin ISD, which covers most of the expenses associated with the Academy through Title I and Title III funding. Also with us is Amalia Dache, who's Afro-Cubana, American scholar and associate professor, and recently associate and tenured. Yay. She's an associate professor in higher education at the University of Pennsylvania. Her experiences as a 1980s Mariel boatlift refugee and student navigating US inner city schools, community college, state college, and a private research-intensive university contribute to her lines of inquiry. She has published in top journals as national awards and funding for projects based on Black, Latina, Latino, Latinx, Afro-Latina, Latino, Latinx populations. Dr. Dache has been an expert in film and news media outlets, especially recently. We've seen her more and more in media, which I love, such as Spike Lee's ESPN documentary, Two Fists Up, Red Table Talk, The Estefans, and MSNBC's American Voices, The Readout, and Jose Diaz's Ballard Reports. She's currently writing a book where she's exploring political and racial hemispheric factors contributing to Cuban nationals and exiles' education trajectories. Dr. Dache. We also have Dr. Nolan Cabrera, who's recently also full professor. He's in the Center for the Study of Higher Education at the University of Arizona, was the only academic featured in the MTV documentary White People. Dr. Cabrera's book, White Guys on Campus, Racism, White Immunity, and the Myth of Post-Racial Higher Education, is a critical examination of race in higher education centering whiteness in an effort to unveil the frequently unconscious habits of racism among white male undergraduates. It was the winner of the 2019 Outstanding Book Award from the Association for the Study of Higher Ed. Dr. Cabrera has given hundreds of lectures, keynotes, addresses, and trainings. However, one of the probably most powerful things he did was key expert witness in the Tucson Unified Mexican-American Studies case, Arce versus Douglas, which was a very high-profile ethnic studies case in the nation. Okay. Oh, that's right. Angela Valenzuela was also an expert witness on that case as well. Give him a hand. That activism and that collaboration is key. So first question for our panelists, and we'll take turns in however way you see fit. Describe the moment when you saw that activism was an essential pathway to our work as scholars. And how does that explain your activism?
Okay, I'll go first because I'm to your right. So the question is, when was it that when I realized activism was a part of my scholarly agenda and/or my research? So I think directly it was 2014. It was 3 weeks after I had moved to Columbia, Missouri, after growing up in New York, and Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And I remember going to Ferguson for the first time and actually engaging in some of the protests. One of our first protests was protesting Walmart. And I was like, well, what does Walmart have to do directly with what's happening with police brutality? And that's what pushed me to start thinking about how capital is accumulated in St. Louis, how geographies are shaped by capital, and how the police state and how development in downtown areas of urban areas were tied together. And so I began studying the Ferguson activist community and looking at how their activism and their resistance was a part of really extending almost educational opportunity to college campuses and to educational institutions in St. Louis. And so that was the direct kind of moment where I was like, okay, this is connected to issues of college access, which is where I come into the study of higher education. And I think indirectly, as I was studying activism is not just protest. And so I learned about my own history as a refugee and how my parents left Cuba, and how when we left in the 80s, we were a part of a resistance. About 125,000 Cubans left Cuba, and that was an act of protest. And so as I did more work, I learned that my own history, my own ancestors were a part of activist communities, but it came from my professional experience in Ferguson so that I could reflect onto my own kind of familiar knowledge communities.
I've had different points in time where there's been this convergence between activism and academics. Even when I was a master's student a while back at the University of Texas, and was involved in LULAC, and was just concerned about certain crises that were happening at the local level. I attended a march, Jose Campos Torres, when he was brutally murdered by police, and people around the state of Texas, what year was that? Probably 78, 79, were concerned about police brutality. And so I was impacted by these different opportunities to be in and with community. And also during that time period, it was the time of the Chicana movement, the women's movement, the protests against the war in Vietnam. And we only had a few channels back then. And so we were all watching Malcolm X and the Black Panthers. And in Texas, of course, it was the takeover of Crystal City that was big. And so conversations around the dinner table were about this and what was going on in the country, and how I was really connecting to, in particular, the Chicana movement, and how I became Chicana. And this was in middle school. I was in middle school. But when I got then to college, what was very impactful was being involved in ethnic studies and in Mexican American studies. And I think that has had an enduring impact on me, such that being involved in ethnic studies became a pathway to survival within higher education, because I was able to merge my advocacy and activist interests with actual education, right? And many of us come out of that, if not directly, then our parents, right? And so I think we owe a lot to the opening up of our universities back in the late 60s and early 70s to these civil rights movements. And more recently, I'm involved in LULAC, and feel that really, if you're inclined, it's a really great way to organize at the grassroots level and to be in community. because a lot of the activities that we're seeing right now, I mean, I think they're screaming for us to be involved, and LULAC has always been that vehicle for me and for a lot of people to be able to advocate on behalf of our community's interests. Yeah, thank you.
So for me, the solidifying moment happened somewhere around April 10th of 1999. And it's a very specific time period for me because it was the third quarter of my first year of undergraduate. And I was taking an introduction to sociology class. And the core text, because you know how professors do, they assign the book that they wrote. And so the book that, yeah, I know, and some of y'all are laughing both at that, but also at yourselves because y'all do that. And so my professor had written the book Freedom Summer about a lot of the activists in the 60s and how their activism had led to sort of an enduring engagement with activism throughout their entire lives. Well, it coincided with the exact time that UC Berkeley decided that it was going to shut down its ethnic studies program, the oldest, most established ethnic studies program in the entire country. And they were going to reincorporate if you're a historian, you'll go to history. If you're a political science, you'll go in that direction. And so how I spent that semester was camped out in front of California Hall. And somehow I still passed my classes. I don't know how in the world that happened. But the point being that, and it was trial by fire because all the theoretical abstractions of activism became realities. Because all too often people keep asking the question, and I mean, this has been an enduring question with activists because you go back to Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, a lot of the more centrist people would ask, well, why don't you negotiate first and then do civil disobedience? And it's an inverted relationship. Activism as a form of social agitation is a demonstration of collective power that then gets you a seat at the bargaining table. Because in the absence of the sit-in, there's no negotiation with the university. And then it also became a really interesting analysis of power and also strategic priorities, because there was one heck of a police presence there. And they weren't just the UCPD from hello? All right, so I'm gonna yell really loud and I don't know what just happened. Hello? Hello? Battery's up. Can y'all hear me? All right, so what happened? Okay, so what happened was that no, sorry. So then you start getting talking about activism, I get amped up, and then I'm shouting too loud. So sorry, Stella, I didn't mean to freak you out in the front row. Sit up there next time. The professed explanation why studies were getting shut down was because they had a budget for it. They had the budget to bring in police from UCLA, from UC Davis, all up and down the entire state of California. They were housing them at hotels in Berkeley. Y'all know that is really expensive. Can you hear me now? Oh, they can hear me on Zoom through this? Okay. Okay, cool. So, and so the amount that was being paid to the police for the overtime to stay there to surveil us while we were doing our sit-in completely peacefully cost more than the annual budget of the ethnic studies program. So it became an analysis of power, but we couldn't get to that point where there was that social tension until we actually demonstrated that we weren't going to take it. And so what happened was that at every point when they would try to arrest us, they would arrest a certain amount of people, but there were too many people to arrest all at once because there's a finite number of resources. And that was one of the areas where it started solidifying also that activism entails a certain amount of social risk. And if there is no risk, then there is no activism, at least in the way that I understand it. And that doesn't mean that advocacy is an unimportant area, but activism for me occupies a very distinct place like that. And so the idea was that we just needed bodies there to continually occupy the space. And this was a decade before the Occupy movement. But what it really became was an analysis of social power and power dynamics and how do you enact power for social equity? And that's the enduring question that I keep asking. And so it also really solidified that sometimes I'm an activist, sometimes I'm an advocate, and I don't actually like the term activist because it actually makes me lazy in my work. If I sit there and say, hey, I'm an activist at work, it makes me actually not do the work as much, as opposed to describing work that I'm doing
And so if I'm doing a specific action, then it becomes activism versus if I'm doing something else. So that was really a solidifying thing that, literally sleeping in a sleeping bag in California Hall and being part of this larger movement to preserve ethnic studies. And then ironically, 15 years later, then I'm an expert witness in the highest profile case defending ethnic studies nationally. So it kind of came all the way full circle. But then ironically, I don't actually consider my own testimony in that case to be activism and more a form of advocacy, but I might be splitting hairs there. So that was a solidifying moment.
Thank you all. This next question, I had it as to share with you from a challenge, but I want to focus on the healing aspect of, what has been the greatest moment of healing through your work, but not just healing in the academic and professional sense, but also in the personal sense. We'll go with Angela this time.
So in the introduction, you learned that we have an escuelita, Academia Cuautli. We were founded in 2014, and we serve fourth graders, fifth graders in numerous East Austin schools. And throughout this whole time period, our community has been under attack. We've not ever been in a situation where we have, we've been free from attack and or trials and difficulties. And so when we got started, immediately we were addressing the high rates of deportation in our community. And, with a lot of mobilization around bringing our parents together to address legal concerns and issues that they had in the case that they got deported, working with the school district to see if there could be some messaging here that our youth are safe. That required some political muscle at the time. And then when Trump got elected, it was devastating to everyone and fearful. And then we had of course, the pandemic and addressing issues with the school district, with our parents not having access to the internet, not having a lot of the things that are taken for granted in the middle class communities, not even having the digital capacities to even access the school's technology portal, with parents in particular not knowing about computers or internet technology. And so we've done a lot of fundraising and brought in support to address the digital equity needs. And in the process, of course, we've been working with our teachers, our Academia Cuautli teachers. We work closely with annually with like 10 or 12, but we're part of a larger community that is part of the Austin Area Association for Bilingual Education. And our teachers told us that if we hadn't been there, that they would have just quit teaching. It's hard to do what everyone else does, but also having to teach what a space bar is, pues que es una página, just at that level, and us asking the district for help that was not there. They didn't even conceptualize of such needs, the zero digital equity kind of support. A community that during the pandemic didn't have access to federal monies. And so we went on a lot of fundraising kinds of platforms, GoFundMe and initiatives, so that we were able to hustle. And we raised about $70,000 for our parents, and it kept them from being gentrified out of the school district. It kept them in, and it was just direct cash resources that went to our families, 40 families, and we didn't lose any of them to gentrification. If they've missed a week of work, they've missed their well-being, right, for food and living expenses and whatnot. And so we provided that kind of direct, immediate support. It was intense because we didn't expect to be in this situation, but it was so moving. And we do have some people who are part of nuestro grupo here. If you can raise your hands. Yeah, thank you. we're a larger community a community-based organization that that works on behalf of our community. But if we hadn't had our CBO and our partnership, I mean, it's pretty frightening to think of what families that are most marginal to the system, what they might have endured. And even then, it was very difficult. We had a serious winter storm. We raised another $11,000 to provide cash money to the families to address their needs. And in the process of doing all of that work, while it was very it felt like an adrenaline high. It's felt like an adrenaline high for so many months throughout. It's been healing being part of a community that it's not me. It's not a heavy lift for one person, because all of us are very caring and dedicated to a community with tremendous needs that needs help that others otherwise got and that are marginal. And I mean, so that work has I think provided uplift to us all. It's very spiritual. It resonates from that place of compassion and love. That's why I love the conference theme, Querencia, because it's that heart center, right? It's that place of love and compassion and caring. And when you're involved in work of this nature, it just comes back in dividends. I mean, it just comes back in a way that's so powerful and rewarding, and that actually like energizes you and makes everything else possible. So, I mean, I'm really grateful. We've got Leslie and Julio and there's Maria Unda, our director, Chris Milk, who works with the teachers. We love the symbol of the eagle, because the eagle has special powers. You know, the eagle has that 360-degree vision. It's distinct in its capacity to see 360 degrees. And so I can't see 360 degrees, and none of us can. But as a community, we have that 360 vision that allows us to know in real time, like what's happening with the teachers, what's happening with members of our community-based organization, what's happening with our parents, what's happening with the children. The eagle also is a sign of revitalization, right? Because eagles, they molt, they lose their plumage, and they're very precarious. And an indigenous elder told me that the eagle decides that they live long lives, but the aging process is one of accumulating oil and debris that they can't get off, and they become heavy, and many of them just die. But others molt, and so they they resurrect basically from a very precarious situation where they lose their plumage and they lack calcium. And so they struggle, and many die in that state. But those that survive, they look like young birds. They just Google it, and it's fantastic to see how the eagle symbolizes that resurrection, that those aspirations, right, for the future, those hopes that I know that we carry, and that's reflected in our song, our theme song, Aguila, which maybe I'll sing for you someday.
So for me, when the federal trial came down in 2017, finding the ban of Mexican American studies unconstitutional, it was a watershed moment, but it was not a healing moment. And I think that's an important distinction, because it was more about a relief of pressure, which is not the same thing as healing. It goes back to the old Malcolm X quote where he said, you don't stab the knife in 9 inches, pull it out 6 and call that progress. As a matter of fact, you don't pull it out all the way and call that progress. It's only when the scar starts healing that we are actually making that progress. And so it was basically taking the metaphorical knife out of our collective backs. But at the same time, there was so much trauma and hurt and harm, because one of the most amazing, beautiful creations in education of the last probably decade had been completely demolished because of opportunistic and racist politicians up in Phoenix. And so the healing has come after. because it was really weird. You think, okay, we're celebrating, we won, yes. And then there was just this weird emptiness that a lot of us were experiencing because we'd been in the fight for a decade. And then all of a sudden it's like, we should feel good about it, but we're still experiencing that loss. And in some respects, we were so in the grind that we didn't have time to process our grief in that. And so where a lot of the healing has come from is that the Mexican American Studies program it was demolished. And you can't basically, if you want to start a fight really quickly in Tucson, say Mexican American Studies, and you'll see where people fall down. Not that I like picking fights, but don't laugh so hard, Stella. But the point being that now that the pressure has been lifted, of course, it's trying to come back through CRT bans, but since that pressure has been lifted because the ban was found unconstitutional, now we have the ability to engage in what my friend and colleague Roberto Rodriguez or Dr. Saintly refers to as creation resistance. We may not be able to recover what was lost, but we can still build things up in the future. And so there are a lot of people who are doing that building. And so in some respects, what Angela just described is sort of the direction that we as a community are trying to go in. And through that is where a lot of the healing comes from. In some respects, it goes back to the old dicho, la cultura cura. And that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to get to that point where we can really heal. And a lot of that becomes having that outlet, channeling the anger and the grief and the hurt and the harm and the trauma and the PTSD, because there's been some overtly violent acts engaged on by a lot of people. And getting through that, it's not just enough to sit there with a therapist. And that is important, though. Don't get me wrong. I'm in therapy myself for a lot of reasons. But the point being that through the creation, it creates a productive outlet to heal, to build. And that's where a lot of the community healing has been going, at least locally.
It's hard for me to talk about healing when it comes to Cubanos in Cuba right now, because we live under a dictatorship that's 63 years old. And Cuba is an Afro-Latin American country that is under the radar because it's a predominantly Black country. And because it's a dictatorship that leans to the left, a lot of US academics don't want to challenge ideology. And so I can't return to my home country. I'm almost banned from returning to my home country because I've spoke out related to the issues Cubanos are having in Cuba, students are having in Cuba, having to do with wanting freedom, wanting a democracy. And so right now there are 50 youth in prison because they came to the streets last summer on July 11th to fight for freedom. And they're facing 10 to 20 years in prison because they want freedom. And so because Cubanos don't have rights, Afro-Cubanos suffer most. So last summer, I don't know if you're all familiar with the Patria Vida movement. The Patria Vida movement started with Afro-Cuban artists, the San Isidro movement. And this movement basically was the beginning of the July 11th protest, which was the largest protest across the island in Cuba, led by youth, many from marginalized communities and many Afro-Cuban youth. So not only is the Patria Vida movement led by Afro-Cuban artists, most of the youth that are on the streets are Afro-Cuban. This is an Afro-Latin American country, and it's under a dictatorship, and we don't pay attention to it because it challenges our ideologies of what liberation looks like for Black people, for Latinx people. And so it's very important for us, and I don't know where we're gonna get to these questions about what do we do, what's next, but for me, practically as a scholar, as a researcher, I can't return to my home country to do the work that we're doing in spaces in the United States. I can't do the study I'm doing in Philadelphia on public housing because the government won't let me back in to do the research, right? Because the government has written about me and called me someone who's an imperialist, someone who's a scholar of post-colonial studies, because this is what the Cuban state has done, right? And we're learning about the role of the Soviets and Russia and Cuba, but we don't want to talk about this because it challenges our ideology about what freedom and liberation is for people of color. right? And so we have to really think about what healing means for people like Cubanos, Afro-Cubanos in this country. And we have to be in solidarity with human rights. And human rights is even politicized, right? The fact that we talk about human rights in a way that isn't left or right wing kind of conversations is really, it's really complicated. Everything is politicized. And so human beings, youth and people and mothers, they get invisibilized for issues of politics. And so it's important to understand, I can't talk about healing. I can't talk about healing until the youth are free, until I can return to my home country and not worry about my family going to jail, right? About the Black Cubanos that have been killed by the police in Cuba, right? We can't talk about that because Cuba is a prison island. And so this is what's hard for me to talk about when we're talking about healing. I don't know when healing is going to come. I think maybe I see some hope in Cubano Americanos in the United States and in the diaspora, you know, celebrities like Gloria Estefan, Emilio Estefan, you know, the Latinx Grammys, you know, the fact that Patria Vida won Song of the Year last year, the Latinx Grammys, that was huge. That was huge for the Cubanos, huge for Afro-Cubans. And so I see hope in seeing solidarity with Venezolanos, with Nicaraguenses. That's where I see hope, is in the coalition building. But there's a lot of work to do. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot to do.
Thank you, Amale. And that was kind of the next follow-up question, is expanding on how we build that solidarity. And I appreciate you really being focused on the humanitarian or the humanizing aspect of this work and centering on that. And specifically as at how it builds solidarity for Afro-Latinx communities. I want to follow up on a specific question for Angela along those same lines, about how the activism also grows coalition specifically across Black and Indigenous and Latinx communities, particularly as it relates to your work.
So when I first went to the University of Texas from Houston, I was a professor at Rice, and I was Stella's professor at Rice back in the day. And so I got involved in LULAC and became the education committee chair for the state of Texas for 2 consecutive sessions. I'm right now on the statewide education committee. I'm not the chair. But back then we had some pretty high profile battles over top 10, school vouchers, school finance, assessment and accountability. And so, you know, we had just a lot of bilingual learners, ELL policy. And so it was just very organic and natural to be involved with our other civil rights groups, with the NAACP in particular. It depended on the issue, but the Urban League and so, I mean, that's the real value of being involved in civil rights organizations like LULAC, because there's these natural affinities and you become, you know, like part of these efforts. And we always work closely together, always. And I really look forward to continuing to do that. I have some ideas for the future about that, but I mean, I really cherished it because we were very few people actually, and we need a lot more people who are advocates in policy. Not everybody has to do that, but we do need more people. And so we counted on each other. I mean, it means doing the hard work behind the scenes of working on policy, educating our communities, developing a media strategy, working individually with offices and office staff, actually writing bills, writing legislation, killing bills, which probably we do more than pass, working on killing a lot of bills. And then meetings, real quick, you know, just kind of gatherings so that we can come together and be a voice, particularly in the Texas State Legislature. Another coalition I've been involved in and was a co-founder was, at first it was the Latino Education Coalition in Austin that got formed at the Capitol. I believe it was in the 2001 legislative session. And so now that's a 20-year coalition. And in 2018, we had a gathering. This is before COVID, and we had already been working closely with our African-American brothers and sisters across different organizations. And so we came together, had a powwow, and we changed our name to the Texas Legislative Equity Coalition. And so, we're substantial. We're a large coalition and very well organized. And we have been very well organized. We're pretty sophisticated in Texas and very well connected on multiple levels. You've mentioned the ethnic studies movement. And so that's like a huge constituency across the state of Texas. And so there's ways that we come together and that we overlap. And there's the Raza Unida generation. We've still got, these individuals that continue to be involved. And so through this coalition work, I think that we're stronger. I'm very encouraged, actually, despite all the bad news that we hear everywhere. I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing in Texas, because I've never seen so much solidarity. And there's our allies too, with the Texas Freedom Network and other groups. And the ethnic studies movement has allowed us to be in coalitional work with the Asian American community and Native American and Indigenous studies. And we have an important convening, if you're in Texas, on April 5th at the State Board of Education, where the anti-critical race theory bill is going to be discussed by the Texas State Board of Education. We all need to be present, to be a body, and to continue to advocate, right? And I think what Arizona did for us in that victory was it reminded us that we actually have rights. We have rights to our knowledge, our culture, our language, our curriculum. We have those constitutional rights. But it's all got to play out, right? There has to be litigation, and there's attorneys across the country that are looking at this, and you need good plaintiffs and you need a good case, right? And so all of that work is getting done, but these things take time and they have to play out. So I want to say that we should be hopeful because we are ascendant as communities of color. And many folks in Texas are running for office. I voted in the last election, and the ballot, I recognized 45–50% of the names were Latinx. And I was like, wow. And all these years of voting, it's happening. And of course, what I learned from Arizona, Agustin Augie Romero? Yeah, what he told me was in the middle of that fight in Arizona, that the dinosaur screams its loudest when it's flailing in the tar pit. And so that's white supremacy. It is screaming its loudest. So we knew this was coming. This is not a surprise, right? But so what we have to do is, of course, work in coalition. And we have so much within the academy to offer because we have our expertise and our expert knowledge. And it really does make a difference, particularly for our communities who aren't just going to go out and do stuff, right? They want to know that the stuff they're doing is logical and well conceived and from a good place and research-based. And then, beyond that, of course, we have some people that will still listen to those arguments in the legislature. But other than that, it's real politic. I'm telling you, it's real politic. And I think we're net positive. I think we're winning because when they have nowhere to go, I mean, they're only resonant. I'm talking about the right wing. I mean, they're resonating at the lowest level of fear. They're going to hold on to their base, but they have no high sounding rhetoric. They have no vision for the future. They have no pathway to like a better life in the world. They can't even language that. So that means that their days are numbered, right? They can't lead anymore. So I'm excited. I'm excited about the future. And I think that the victory is one that you claim now, and you claim it in the work that you do in the community. You claim it in the expressions of solidarity, of love, compassion, querencia. Oh my God. Amen.
Gracias. I'm going to let Nolan answer one question because he's got to go catch a flight. Like literally rush, beeline it straight to the airport. Before you leave, and then I have another question or two. What advice do you have for our young scholars, developing scholars, considering their own activism and their work.
Thank you for that. And yeah, and I do apologize that I have to bounce out of here. Julian over there bet me $5 and I'm gonna miss my flight. So I hope that you all will let me win $5 from him. So I'll collect at the next AAHHE. But I think for me, we've been talking a lot about the pragmatics, but I'm gonna talk for a second philosophically how it is that at least I get through. And I hope that this I hope this will maybe, sometimes I think about this as just a rationalization, and sometimes I think about it as an actual philosophy. So just bear with me. If this works with you, great. And if it doesn't, that's fine too. But I go back to Paulo Freire's prophetic words where he said that hope is an ontological need. And I meditate on hope consistently because hope, as distinguished by Cornel West, he talks about the difference between, say, optimism and pessimism versus hope. So if I'm sitting here looking out at the available evidence and saying things are either going to get better or worse, that's an optimism, pessimism argument. But hope, no matter what the circumstances are, reigns eternal. And it's the foundational principle of everything that goes after it. Because we're necessarily incomplete people in the process of becoming more fully human. And our incompleteness concurrently means that our oppressive structures are also incomplete. And so what I always have to get challenged to do, and trust me, this was really tough in Arizona, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, where it was just an all-out assault on raza. And basically, once what the Tribe Called Quest referred to as Agent Orange got into office, that once he came in there, it was sort of like the rest of the country caught up to Arizona. And, we always say, it's a dry heat. Well, we'd also say it's a dry hate. And it was a tough time. And there were times where you're like, where is their possibility? Where is their hope? But as the sociologist Michelle Bush always reminds us, there are always cracks in the walls of whiteness. And if I do not see them, it is not because they are not there. The hope requires me to understand that they are always there, that there is always possibility. And if I am not seeing them, then it means that I lack the creative imagination or I'm too far away from it to actually see where they are. And so for me, that's always been the guiding principle here, is that hope has to reign eternal, because if it doesn't, then I just fall into a form of nihilism. And as Immortal Technique reminds us, yes, I'm stuck in early 2000s hip hop, but as the world is raining down on top of me, pessimism is an emotion, not a philosophy. And it's too easy to slip into nihilism. It's too easy to slip into pessimism. And so for me, I have to be what Cornel West refers to as a prisoner of critical hope, and always hold that in my heart as we're going through, understanding my own incompleteness. And that gives me promise to actually attack the incompleteness of the oppressive structures that we're dealing with.
Mic drop. Thank you. Thank you, Nolan. Travel safely, my brother.
I appreciate y'all.
We'll see you back in the Valley of the Sun. I have an important question from that was sent from us from our colleagues that are watching on TV here. This is an important question, and to see what we can squeeze in. How successfully have you challenged the academic community about existing political ideologies that are often in conflict with making progress towards addressing oppressive regimes in some of our communities abroad, like in Cuba, Venezuela, and so on?
Yeah. So I think right now, I would say that the media attention that Cubanos are getting because of their activism globally is kind of pushing the needle on looking to the Caribbean, Venezuela, Nicaragua in a way that's much more critical. I think that's happening post July 11th. I think with Ukraine too, we're looking at the post-Soviet state, right? And a lot of my work, I think of post-colonial studies, Said's work, Spivak's work, in a way that's also understanding that the Soviet state was also imperialist and colonialist. So really understanding coloniality. I also think that we have to, I've been really pushing on understanding Latinidad and Blackness in a way that's not centered in the US, right? So the fact that we're here as Latinx people and we do work locally, which I think is so important. I'm doing work in Philly, I did work in St. Louis, I did work in Rochester when I first started doing research on college access, but you also have to have a similar kind of broader view of the global conditions of Latinidad. And so you have to understand the Americas. You have to understand the hemisphere. If you don't do work that is grounded in the hemisphere, then you're centering whiteness and capitalism in the United States by mere being an academic from a US institution. Do you see what I'm saying? So you have to do the work in a way that's grounded in Latin America, in el Caribe, right? Understanding the histories of Blackness and Latinidad that come out of these spaces that are largely invisible in our journals and our books and how we publish. We have to learn how to speak the language of our ancestors, whether they're indigenous or colonial, thinking about the Spanish, right? Because there's hybridity there that's important to acknowledge. And we have to really acknowledge the writing, the scholars that are coming out of Latin America, right? Because we're in a privileged position being in the United States, right? So we have to, I think that's what's been really working, is having a nuanced, sophisticated conversation about the hemisphere, about Latinidad, about Blackness, really complicating these binaries. And that's what I think has been getting more attention, challenging these binaries, challenging these ideological binaries that we were taught while we were training in these US institutions, and really pushing in a way that makes us uncomfortable, right? I had to learn how to read Spanish, and I had to learn how to understand Spanish and speak academic Spanish in a way that was very uncomfortable, because guess what? In the United States, you don't get taught Spanish. You know, you don't get taught Spanish, you lose the language. And so I had to kind of fight back and do that while I'm learning a history that I don't even know, right? I know more history about US Blackness than I know about Afro-Cubanidad, right? Why is that? We don't teach that, we don't know that. We don't know the Latinidad from the Caribe. We don't know that when we think about Latinidad in large, because of Cubanos only being, you know, the third largest population, and the assumptions of whiteness that come with being Cuban American, right? So when we think of Cuban Americans as white, we're invisibilizing 70% of the population, and you're invisibilizing Afro-Cubanos. And so we have to be very careful when we call in Cuban Americans Trump supporters, white Republicans. That's a very lazy argument. So I think we're pushing that. And this multiracial movement, the Patriar Movement that's led by Afro-Cubans, is really an example of pushing the conversation of nuance and sophistication, especially because we're scholars. This is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be leveling up, right? So yes.
Yeah, that's a great question. The way that we connect to this is with the teaching of indigeneity at Academia Cuautli, and it involves teaching from, in part, a danza mexica epistemology, and also addressing the ancient knowledge. But beyond that, it's really disrupting this symbolic order of borders, right? And understanding that you know, the children, they get like viewed as newcomers, right, as immigrants, but what they learn right away, and it's so redemptive and healing to them, is that they're the descendants of people who have never left the continent, right? And that we all are descendants of people that are part of this continent, and that we had this you know, this longer history that is identified with various different indigenous tongues and languages and dialects, that though we've lost, we can still reclaim you know, that which has been preserved. And it's a more expansive view. It is post-colonial, right? It is like connecting with scholars from intellectually from Latin America, and being part of the Abiyayalan movement. I mean, it's a movement in Latin America, the idea that, you know, I mean, that's a colonial term, Latin America, Central America. I mean, these are all colonial, I mean, we're on Turtle Island right now, right? And so I think that when we work with children, they understand this, right? And it speaks to them, it resonates. At first we thought it might not. As we organize the school, and it's been quite the opposite. It's connecting to their own deep senses of identity based on where they come from, that helps them to not feel like strangers or as alien, right, in our schools. So escuelitas are powerful, let me tell you. They provide that anchoring for not just the children, but for us all.
Let's give these amazing, amazing activist scholars a hand. Thank them for their strong medicine. You know, and thanking you both for your strong medicine is the idea that your words, your work, and what you do and what you've done has blessed us, is blessing us, so that we can bless others as well in our work. Gracias. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the day.
And also for board members, if you'll stay for a photograph, and then we'll take our break and move to our next session. So those who get photographed, please come up here, por favor. Gracias. Gracias, Cristobal.